now to have impact from a different point of view, we've got Kathryn Monk from NRW who's going to come and talk to us for half an hour or so and take questions for the next 2 days, if you like. Kathryn, Kathryn is part of the strategic advisory group, so it is, and coming from NRW is very pertinent. And NRW is also involved in several of the clusters that we're running already, but can be and potentially should be involved in more of the cluster activities that we're doing as well. So do take the time to talk to Kathryn. And okay, over to you.
Yes, my apologies. Well, thank you very much for asking me to talk. I think hopefully what I'm going to say does sort of gel well with the previous speaker. I think there's a bit of a blurb about my background, but I'm an ecologist. I was an academic, got lost overseas for quite a number of years, came back and for my sins went into the Environment Agency. Came over to Wales thinking revolution breeds on the edges of empires, and then when we split, I stayed, and I'm the science advisor. The basic theme really through my whole career has been really interested in applied science, and as I sort of moved from doing the research to managing and directing programs and then institutions, I found I was constantly faced with really good quality research from people, but not answering the right question. And so as a science advisor for NRW, a lot of my job is trying to persuade people to, in the policy side, to really search for the right question that they need, but to do that in partnership with the academics who have not necessarily more curiosity, but many different perspectives to bring in. So it's finding that right question and then working out how quickly and how cheaply we can find the evidence to make a decision. So on this, for my sins, I was involved in the RAE 2008. I then was really interested in and helped, I'm afraid, develop the impact approach, ran part of the pilot assessments, and then did the work as a full member on the 2014 side. And we're now discussing how impact side of it will change or refine for 2020. So as long as I can do this, is it the... Oh, so that's a good one. Did I go the wrong way? Okay, right. Well, what I was going to say, oh, thank you. So yeah. Left, right. Right. Okay. Yeah. So impact. Obviously, there was recognition of impact before. There was life about impact before REF and before the Research Council started to think about it. But it was mainly driven by people with particular interests in it themselves or particular relationships. But you're probably all familiar with this scheme of the various types of impact that you might consider out of research from the research councils in their pathways to impact, and that equally mapped across to the REF. And so the sort of drivers and the increasing awareness and publicity about impact has come from these two areas of research councils asking you to think about what potential impact you might have. And at the same time, for the REF, you obviously, some of you had to sit and think quite deeply about where the impact might have been from your work, whereas others, you were well embedded in that delivery and aware of it, and the impact case studies, I hope, were fairly easy for you to write. Managed really well. Nearly 7,000 case studies were submitted and assessed. They are all available for analysis. I don't know how many of you have looked at them, so I'm going to be a teacher now. Hands up, who's looked at the REF database on impact case studies? Okay, a few. Well, less than not, but really, given that it's so important for you to be thinking about it now for this programme and for the work through to 2020, I suggest you do have a look. either look at the ones that are particularly important to your areas, or for the types of things and the way in which they were presented. One of these sort of word things shows the scope of the impact case studies, and not surprisingly, lots of words that you might have expected, but health coming out, obviously important. Development, work, yes, well that was quite important. Industry, surprisingly small there. Policy was a major element of impact case studies. There's been an analysis of how the REF worked, and in particular how the impact worked, and the recognition that it had started to drive some cultural changes, both in individuals and institutions. The quote in the consultant report, which is in blue, you can read it there, I thought was perhaps not the best quote. It was interesting, yes. So, it's nice that people, because you had to think about it, some people thought, oh yeah, actually this is really interesting, and I got more and more interested in it. I do think that if you are in an area that has potential non-academic excellence impact, it's a shame that the REF has driven you to realise it. However, it's good. More and more of you are aware. Certainly REF doesn't expect every single academic to deliver non-academic excellent impact, but and it still will be only a proportion. This time I think it was 1 for every 10 FTE, and I don't think it's going to be many more for the next one, but we don't know. And the bigger the pool your department has to choose from, the better. So we've got individuals being more aware of it. If you look at the impact assessments, being more aware of the types of impact that you might focus on in the future. But it's obviously also changed the institutions, and that was, from my perspective, one of my main hopes, that when in the past, when we would go to a university to ask for access and help from academics, VC's focus were on top quality academic papers, and often very little else. And particularly for policy, there wasn't a driver because there wasn't the money there. Now, of course, there is a big driver, and your institutions are taking a lot more notice of it. And in particular, I'm going to talk just a little bit about implementing systems to store evidence and impact, capturing evidence on impact on an ongoing basis, and then also building a plan of the impact into projects. This word that I don't know whether academics are using, but certainly governments are using now, co-production. If you put that in your proposals, that's quite useful. From an academic point of view, there are a lot of new and interesting ways in which, as an individual, you can start to track your work. Again, I suppose I'm going to ask, how many of you have got a NRN-LCEE unique identifier number? Oh, brilliant. Okay, so we'll skip the next 2 slides. Okay, for those that you haven't, and I don't know if you're fully aware of this, but it's a really growing discussion in the academic world about getting that number, so that you can identify yourself on submissions and on other through other ways where your work is going to be used. And there is this national consortium now for the universities, so that the institutions can provide access, so you haven't got to pay for it, or at least not so much. And there are institutional systems for mapping where the work is used. And so again, how many people are aware of research fish? Okay, Yeah. So but there's only 17 universities signed up to it at the moment, out of however many we've got now, 130 odd. So that's something to be aware of. These aren't necessarily official yet, although the research councils, I don't know if they've actually started to ask, but are certainly considering whether you will need your ORCID number. In REF also, that potentially you may need some of these unique identifiers in the future. But for me, what's interesting is that push for the unique tracking of both yourselves and where your work is being used. And that discussion hasn't really penetrated into government yet. And for it to work for impact, I think we will have to think about that as well. Obviously the research councils are, because they are much further on and more structured in needing to demonstrate follow where the work they funded has been used for impact. Government directly fund a lot of research, obviously, and we don't have these systems to track what happens after the final report has been signed off. So we've got a number of these cultural changes that were identified by the consultancy programme after REF finished. And there was an interesting section on the impact of impact on the research users. And this quote, that academics worried that pestering people they collaborate with could jeopardise their relationship. And I don't know how many of you asked for a sort of, a contribution statement, a statement of whatever it was called, from your user to submit an impact case study. Did anybody here do that? How many of you had submitted an impact case study and had to go to a government person for a statement of support? Just one. And was that easy? Sorry, I didn't.
Not too bad, because we had there were offices in the university that dealt with it for us, so we gave them contact.
Yeah. Well, certainly out of DEFRA, there was an advice to civil servants of how to respond and the type of template, and it wasn't an onerous task. We, in NRW, I set up a similar template and guided the staff to write these. But the main message really, from my point of view, is that it shouldn't have been an onerous task, because you need to take, in many cases, the users with you all the way through. And in the future, these tracking systems and other types of evidence of the interaction are going to be needed and recorded, so that that final statement will be much easier and will be almost automatically produced. It won't be a case of you thinking, well, I spoke to Kathryn, 2 years ago, and now the project's finished, so I hope she's going to write a letter saying how helpful I was then. And the message really out of that is this long-term relationship. And you heard earlier a lot of quite comprehensive explanation of policy and evidence. And this really just is sort of my summary of why we do this. Certainly from the environmental side, and actually across government, of course, most of the problems that are being faced now are much more complex. The multidisciplinary nature of societal problems is recognised. So they are often not able to be dealt with internally within a department. A lot of policymakers are no longer long-term experts. Again, the previous speaker referred to how many times she'd moved, and there's a whole set of civil servants that do move a lot. But in parallel, there are a lot of embedded experts, certainly in central government, but the length of time they spend now in one particular subject has significantly decreased. And we just don't have so many government scientists as we used to have in various laboratories. And they did have that remit to review, synthesize, and spend a lot of time with government. And most of those are gone. So inevitably, these pressures have moved towards this new recognition and design of impact through REF and through the pathways of impact. And it means a lot more expectation from universities, looking for more partnerships and this co-production. So just again, just a summary, the two cultures. We've talked about the difference in cultures between academics and government. Actually, certainly ever since I've come back to Britain, which is over 10 years now, the different motivations, cultures, time frames, the lack of shared understanding. I think the lack of understanding of the cultures is less, so we understand each other more than we did, but it's still, for a lot of people, a bit of a black box on either side. We put a lot of effort, though, through research councils into workshops. Lots of PhD students and young early career scientists have had opportunities for workshops. Speed dating with policy people is quite good. Role playing, I do a lot of workshops for universities, actually not so much in Wales as in England, so maybe there's a flag, on where evidence goes into government, how it goes in, and take people through role playing of what it's like to be a minister or a civil servant dealing with evidence as it comes in. Just because of who you are, you know, very sort of focused research programs, I wanted to flag in terms of that culture the types of questions we ask when we're identifying evidence, and perhaps from a curiosity-driven academic researcher, you will tend to ask those first question, really, maybe the second one. It's basic understanding. It's hopefully, certainly in ecology, increasing predictive powers of understanding systems. But the 4 and 5, effectiveness of interventions and optimizing interventions, you know, would not normally perhaps come to your minds in providing a proposal to research councils. But that's what most of the government people really should be asking. And certainly at a delivery level, such as NRW, such as the protection agencies, they are delivering policy, they're designing the interventions, and there's a lot more scope in focusing work of academic communities on these. And again, because this is an academic, a sort of research program, I wanted to just focus on this co-production and this issue of identifying the question, finding the time from yourselves and from the policy people to explore the issues the policy people have and the questions they think they want answered, and after discussion, the real question or the best question that could be asked. And sometimes we get the question right first go, but quite often, because policy operational people have so little time, quite honestly, to sit back and think or keep up with the field, they don't know the new perspectives that you can bring. That discussion, those early discussions of designing and identifying the question are really crucially important. Obviously, the partnerships in getting the funding, that's very important. Research councils need a lot more evidence that the users are engaged and are going to be engaged through the process. No longer will you please write to me and say, by Friday, can you write a letter of support saying you think my project is good? Because we're not going to do that. And it won't be of any use to the research councils because they are wanting more evidence of how engaged I'm going to be in your programs. and that will take more time. We recognise the research councils often don't help by giving you very short periods of time, and there is quite a lot of discussion about that, of the amount of time research councils give for calls, but at the moment we have to work in that. Conducting research, certainly again from something like NRW, we often provide data. We are, government now expect and require us to be far more open with the data. Where we aren't, it's either because of personal nature or because we just don't have the capacity to prepare that data for transfer as yet. Publishing research and producing briefings, we mentioned that briefly earlier, about not just producing your academic papers, but policy briefings. Again, having discussed the project and perhaps kept the users involved in the research, producing those briefings becomes much easier. But I know from own experience that both the policy people and the academics will say, well, you know, they should do it. And quite honestly, we're going to have to do it together. But if you do put in the effort and chase the users, you do need to chase us. I'm sure that the more useful briefings can be prepared, and the dissemination and the workshops. And now you've got a lot more money that you can apply within this programme to do these things. But as I say, and I've referred, I think, several times, one of the biggest challenges is simply the time, certainly from our side. Those of you that may have shadowed people in government, the timetables, the issues that we work on every day are numerous, and it's a real battle to get the time to sit down and think with you. And it come into my head now, I think one of the things to bear in mind if you do get one of these grants for the knowledge exchange activities is make it as specific as possible. Quite often, as academics, we want to look across a whole field, quite a range of subjects in a workshop. From a policy point of view, that's really difficult. If you put out a broad request for policy people to come in and talk about improving agricultural systems, you're not going to get it. If you say one particular system and a series of new approaches, you will get one or two very focused policy makers that will come. And that may be more valuable for you than trying to pull in a lot of policy people that, quite honestly, may well drop out on the day because they've been called to do other things for their governments or for their boards. The other thing on there about challenges for co-production is that it starts to become more uncertain as to what the outcome will be, what the results are. Now, I know you don't know the results of your experiments before you start, hopefully, but you have a pretty good idea of where it's going. In co-production, in the more applied areas, in discussion, in review, in systematic review, or whatever it may be, you may well change the whole direction, or you may change significant parts. And dealing with that uncertainty is important and is a challenge for you, but it's also a big challenge for government, for policy and operational people who need to be more aware and to be more explicit about the risks involved in the evidence they use. So, as I say, there are workshops, there are all sorts of things that we can do to improve that cultural understanding. We've produced various guides, and you probably are aware of these examples, the NERC Science into Policy, the LWEC Knowledge Exchange Guides. But you might find it interesting to look at the guides that the policy people use. So one of the prime ones is the Chief Scientist's Guide to Policy Makers for the use of science and engineering in policy making. And I think quite often it's far more useful for me to put myself and read the guides for the other people than it is to read the guide that's been written for me. So from your side, I think you might find the evidence and evaluation in policy making and that guide, the other guide, really illuminating, shall we say. Just a last side, and I know we haven't got very many people, in fact there's only 2 of us from the other side. The importance of research user engagement throughout the process cannot be overstated, and that came out of the assessment of the REF 2014. There were nearly 1,000 people in the REF, academics and users. Of that, only just under 300 were users. Some of the users were like myself, who have a foot in both sides. So I was a full panel member, and I assess academic as well as non-academic excellence. I would say probably was over 200 would have come in specifically to assess the impact. So it's not very helpful for me to say to you, we need more research users. But as you work with more of us, then dropping in these discussions and highlighting the opportunities for the research users to be involved in REF, I think is really important. Had my boss been here, I would be saying the biggest challenge for being a member of REF is not getting official time off to do it. In the universities, most of you do get the time. It's not yet considered a priority for us, which is, so I did most of mine at the weekends and in my holidays. Anyway, so just to summarise some of the things here, changes that we're seeing on both sides linked to REF. The first one is working with REF. Well, obviously you have to. I think we need to encourage the research users to be much more involved in that process. From impact, there are lots of changes going on. You are all getting much more aware. You recognise, and there is a lot of formal development in tracking impact, both as an individual and as a institution. There's also an increased recognition of impact as a marketing tool for the university, so that should help more and should help drive more resources into providing central services to help you develop that impact. Co-production, as I've mentioned several times. The other thing which I think is interesting for coming out of in the impact field is the issue of journals and where you can publish work that you do, which is primarily focused on evidence. And that's a discussion, I think, with the journal community, which is developing and which you should be aware of and push for a wider acceptance of the type of academic paper, and certainly at the interdisciplinary level, where we have a lot of trouble, both, I was going to say from academics, but we have a lot of trouble generally in getting people to assess fairly interdisciplinary work. And as academics on panels, be they peer review panels, be they moderating panels, when you're dealing with interdisciplinary work, you have to recognise the challenges of that and not approach it as a top-class biology or a top-class social one. We had a lot of discussions on the REF panels about that, and certainly on mine, Earth and Environment Sciences, we have a whole range of papers from literally hardcore geology papers through to social science. And the recognition of the differences in disciplines and the recognition of the challenges of interdisciplinary work really needs to be brought to the fore in discussions in the academic world as impact grows. From our side, as I say, it's a bit pointless because there isn't anybody sorry, Matthew, not many people are listening yet. We really need more support from the institutions to get the time to be involved. I think we too need to look at the tracking of impact, how we track. The research councils are doing this, but we certainly in government, we haven't really, I think, spent much time thinking about that as yet, co-production, and this increased focus on risk and uncertainty, as I've said. I just have a couple others, because although this talk was about REF impact and cultural change, there are a couple of other things coming through quite important in cultural change, in changes from REF, which don't necessarily link into impact, but I think I just wanted to tag them on because I think they're important and you will probably discuss them elsewhere. And that is open access. That is driving a lot of change, a lot of discussion in academic and in government. And there will be requirements on open access repository for the next REF that you probably are already aware of anyway. But it's also, open access is also challenging our ideas of peer review and the peer review process. And I think that's also something that we should spend a bit more time thinking about as we prepare for the next REF, and particularly for the impact case studies. And in metrics, of course, we've gone through, well, there's going to be consultation. We're having a lot of discussions about metrics, how to measure both academic and non-academic excellence. There was a lot of discussion when we first promoted the idea of impact about how difficult it is to measure. And at a previous discussion before the REF started, particularly amongst the university people who were saying, you can't measure impact in this field or that field. Rather than saying that, I think it provides a really interesting research challenge, and that which you should embrace, that you should look at. But how can you measure the impact of some of the work you're doing in non-academic areas? And there's a lot more work that we could do and a lot more thought we could put in to those types of metrics. And hopefully that's helped inspire you to have a few more discussions around this over the next couple of days. As David said, I am here, and you do come and ask me if you have any questions or any ideas of some of these challenges that I've put forward. Thank you.